The first sound I remember is the jingle of keys. Not the cheerful clink of coins or the soft chime of a church bell, but a sharp, metallic rattle that cut through the stillness of our house like a warning. It was 1953, and I was 7, small enough to hide under the dining room table, my knees pressed to my chest, my breath so shallow it barely stirred the air. The keys meant he was home, Dr. Gerald Fields, my father, the man Springfield worshipped as a saint. To them, he was the doctor who delivered babies at midnight and treated the poor for free. To me, he was the shadow that made silence my only friend. Our house stood on a quiet lot, set back from the town center, a grand old place with a wide porch and ivy crawling up its brick walls. From the outside, it gleamed with the promise of a perfect life, white curtains fluttering in the breeze, roses blooming in neat rows. Inside, it was a tomb. The window stayed shut, the curtains drawn, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something heavier, like fear soaked into the wood. Springfield in the 1950s was all about appearances, starched dresses, Sunday sermons, and neighbors who smiled but never pried. A doctor needs privacy, Father would say, his voice smooth as the whiskey he sipped at night. And so, no one looked too closely at the Fields family. I learned early to be invisible. If I was quiet, if I moved like a ghost through the halls, I could avoid his eyes, those cold, gray eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. Mother, Margaret, was already fading by then. She'd been a seamstress once, her fingers nimble with needle and thread, her laugh bright enough to fill a room. But Father's medicines dulled her spark. For her nerves, he'd say, slipping a pill into her water or pressing a syringe to her arm when she dared to disagree. By the time I was old enough to notice, she was a specter, drifting through the house with empty eyes, her words slurred, her hands trembling. Sometimes, she'd hum an old hymn, her voice faint, like a radio signal from a life she'd lost. Mrs. Sarah, our housekeeper, was the only other soul in our prison. A thin woman with graying hair and downcast eyes, she cleaned, cooked, and obeyed without question. I used to watch her scrub the floors, her movements mechanical, as if she could erase what she saw if she worked hard enough. Once, when I was 6, I asked her why Mother slept so much. She froze, her rag dripping soapy water onto the tile. "Your mom is just tired, child," she whispered, glancing at the door. Best not to ask. I didn't understand then, but I felt the weight of her words, heavy as the rag doll she'd sewn for me in secret, the only toy I was allowed. Springfield buzzed with life outside our walls. The town square was alive with farmers' markets, children chasing each other through the park, and church bells calling folks to worship. I'd press my face to the window, watching girls my age skip rope, their laughter sharp against the quiet of our house. I wanted to join them, to feel the sun on my face, to be loud and careless. But Father's rules were iron. "A doctor's daughter doesn't run wild," he'd say, his voice low, controlled, the kind that made your stomach twist. The one time I begged to go to a neighbor's birthday party, he turned to Mother, his smile tight. "Margaret, you're upsetting the girl with these ideas." That night, he injected her at the dinner table, her head slumping onto her plate as I stared, frozen. "See what you did," he said, pointing at me. "Go to your room." I obeyed, clutching my doll, my tears silent. Disobeying meant consequences, not shouts or slaps, but something worse. Father didn't need to raise his voice. He had his black bag, always close, filled with vials and syringes that could make you sleep, make you forget, make you nothing. I didn't know then what he was doing, not really. I thought Mother was sick, that Father was curing her. I thought his rules were love, his control was care. But even at 7, I felt the wrongness, like a splinter under my skin. Why did the house feel colder when he was home? Why did Mrs. Sarah's hands shake when she poured his coffee? Why did Mother's hymn stop when his keys jingled in the lock? School was my only escape, though even there, I carried the weight of home. I was the quiet girl, the one who sat in the back, head down, hands folded. Dr. Fields's daughter, so well-mannered, the teachers would say, their smiles proud, oblivious. They didn't see the fear behind my stillness, the way I flinched at loud noises or scanned the room for exits. I wanted to tell someone, to scream that our house wasn't what it seemed, but who would believe me? Father was the man who stitched up their son's knees, who prayed with them at church. I was just a shy girl with a vivid imagination. One day, I found a small rebellion. At school, a teacher, Miss Clara, lent me a book, and of Green Gables. "For a dreamer like you," she said, her eyes kind. I hid it under my mattress, reading by moonlight when Father was asleep. Anne's world, full of hope and chatter, was so unlike mine, yet it lit something inside me. I started whispering stories to my doll, tales of a girl who ran free, who laughed without fear. It was my secret, my defiance, a spark Father couldn't douse. But sparks can't burn in a house built on fear. That same year, I overheard Father talking to Mother, his voice a low hiss. "A wife of mine doesn't question me, Margaret." I peeked through the door crack, saw him fill a syringe, saw her slump in her chair. He sat afterward, sipping whiskey, staring into nothing, satisfied. I crept back to my room, my heart pounding, the splinter of wrongness digging deeper. I didn't know it then, but that moment planted a seed, not just of fear, but of something fiercer. A question, maybe, or a promise: how long could I stay invisible? How long could I survive in the shadow of a monster? The air in our house grew heavier as I turned 8, then 9, the years blurring into a rhythm of survival. Springfield seasons painted the world outside, crisp autumn leaves, snow dusting the town square, spring's lilacs perfuming the air, but inside, time felt frozen, trapped in the sterile glow of Father's control. The jingle of his keys still sent my heart racing, but I'd learned to move like a shadow, to anticipate his moods. A smile meant safety, for a moment. A furrowed brow meant retreat. I was becoming an expert at reading him, though it cost me pieces of myself I didn't yet know I was losing. Our home, with its polished floors and heavy drapes, was a stage for Father's perfection. Neighbors saw the doctor's pristine life, the manicured lawn, the Sunday suits, the daughter who never misbehaved. They didn't see the truth: Mother's vacant stares, the locked cabinet in Father's office, the way Mrs. Sarah's hands trembled when she set his dinner plate. I began to notice patterns. Father's medicines for Mother came after she spoke too loudly, laughed too freely, or dared to suggest I join the church choir. "You're upsetting the family, Margaret," he'd say, his voice calm, clinical, as he prepared a syringe. She'd slump, her eyes rolling back, and I'd swallow my questions, my rag doll clutched tight. School remained my refuge, though it was a fragile one. Miss Clara, my third-grade teacher, noticed my silence but didn't push. Instead, she gave me more books: Little Women, The Secret Garden, each one a lifeline to a world where girls could be brave, where families weren't prisons. I hid them under my floorboard, a secret hoard I read when the house was still. One day, I slipped, leaving Little Women on my desk. Father found it. "Who gave you this?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous. I stammered Miss Clara's name, my stomach nodding. He didn't shout, didn't strike me. He simply burned the book in the fireplace, the pages curling black as he watched me. "No more nonsense, Dorothy. A girl's head shouldn't be filled with such ideas." I nodded, tears silent, but inside, I vowed to keep reading, to keep dreaming. Mother's decline was harder to ignore. By 1955, she was a ghost, her once vibrant eyes clouded, her movements sluggish. I'd find her in the parlor, staring at nothing, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on her lap. Sometimes, she'd murmur my name, her voice faint. "Dorothy, my girl, don't let him," she never finished, her words dissolving into a haze. I wanted to shake her, to beg her to fight, but I was 9, and the weight of her surrender felt like my failure. I started sneaking her water, hoping to dilute the drugs, but Father noticed. "Don't meddle, Dorothy," he said, his eyes cold. "You'll make her worse." I stopped, ashamed, believing I'd hurt her. Mrs. Sarah was my only ally, though her help was cautious. She'd slip me extra bread when Father wasn't looking, her eyes soft with pity. Once, when I had a fever, she sat by my bed, pressing a cool cloth to my forehead. "You're stronger than you know, child," she whispered, glancing at the door. Don't let this house break you. Her words were a spark, but they also burned. Why didn't she do more? Why didn't she tell someone? Years later, I'd understand her fear, her job, her survival, depended on father. In 1950s Springfield, a black woman's word against a white doctor's was dust in the wind. The town's admiration for father only deepened my isolation. At church, people shook his hand, praising his charity. Dr. Fields, you're a blessing, they'd say, while I stood beside him, my smile practiced, my hands clasped tight to hide their trembling. I wanted to scream, to tell them what he did, but fear choked me. What if they didn't believe me? What if father found out? The thought of his black bag, its vials glinting in the lamplight, kept me silent. One spring day, a rare moment of lightness broke through. A classmate, Ellen, invited me to her birthday party. I hesitated, knowing father's rules, but Ellen's mother had spoken to Mrs. Sarah, who nodded her approval. For one afternoon, I was a child, laughing, eating cake, playing tag in a backyard alive with color. I felt weightless, like the girls in my books. When I got home, my cheeks flushed with joy, I ran to tell father, hoping he'd share my happiness. His face darkened. Who gave you permission? He asked, his voice ice. Mother, hearing my excitement, tried to intervene. Gerald, it's good for her to have friends. He didn't answer her. He opened his bag, filled a syringe, and injected her right there, her body crumpling like paper. You caused this, he said to me, his finger pointing. Go to your room. I fled, my joy shattered, the taste of cake sour in my mouth. That night, lying in bed, I heard mother crying through the walls, her sobs muffled, broken. I hugged my doll, whispering to it as if it could answer. Why does he hate us? I didn't understand then that it wasn't hate, but control, a need to bend us to his will. I began to see father differently, not as a father, but as a force, like a storm that could destroy with a glance. I started watching him, noting his habits, the way he locked his office door, the way he checked mother's pulse after dosing her, the way he smiled for guests but never for us. At school, I withdrew further. Ellen tried to stay my friend, but I pushed her away, afraid my darkness would taint her light. Miss Clara noticed. One day, she kept me after class. Dorothy, is everything all right at home? She asked, her voice gentle. I froze, my throat tight. I wanted to tell her, to spill every secret, but father's shadow loomed. Yes, ma'am, I lied, my eyes on the floor. She didn't press, but her frown lingered, and I wondered if she saw through me. By 10, I felt the first stirrings of defiance. I'd steal glances at father's office when he was out, wondering what secrets his locked cabinet held. I'd hide scraps of paper, writing stories about a girl who escaped a monster, tucking them under my mattress. These acts were small, but they were mine, proof I wasn't yet broken. One Sunday, father hosted a lunch for his colleagues, a rare event that filled the house with forced cheer. Mother, less drugged that day, brushed my hair, her hands trembling. Behave, Dorothy, she whispered, her eyes pleading. I nodded, sensing her fear mirrored mine. The lunch was a performance. Father laughed, charming as ever, while I served water, silent as a maid. One doctor, Dr. Michael, turned to me, his smile kind. What do you want to be when you grow up, Dorothy? The question caught me off guard. I glanced at father, then spoke, my voice small but clear. A doctor, like Daddy. The table fell silent. Father's smile vanished, his eyes narrowing. Girls don't need such ambitions, he said, his laugh forced. Dorothy will be a good wife, like her mother. The other doctors chuckled, but Dr. Michael's brow furrowed, and I felt a pang of shame. That night, father called me to his office. The room smelled of alcohol and leather, its shelves lined with medical books I wasn't allowed to touch. Who put that idea in your head? He asked, his voice a blade. I shook my head, trembling. No one, Daddy. I just wanted to be like you. He stared at me, then opened a drawer, pulling out a syringe and a vial. You want to be a doctor? He said, almost mocking. I'll show you control. Before I could move, he grabbed my arm, the needle piercing my skin. The world blurred, my limbs heavy, my voice trapped. "This is for foolish ideas," he said, watching me slump, his face detached, scientific. I woke hours later, my head pounding, my mouth dry. Through the door, I heard Mother's voice, faint, pleading. "Gerald, she's just a child." His reply was sharp. "Discipline, Margaret. Or would you rather she embarrass us?" I lay still, the weight of his drugs in my veins, and knew then that I wasn't just a daughter to him. I was a patient, an experiment, a thing to be controlled. But in that moment, amid the fog, a spark flickered, not just fear, but anger, a seed of resistance that would grow, though I didn't yet know how. The needle's sting lingered in my memory long after the fog of that first injection cleared. I was 10, and the world had shifted. Father's office, once just a forbidden room, became a place of dread, its locked cabinet a silent threat. The house on our quiet Springfield lot felt smaller, its walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken fear. Outside, the town carried on, children played in the park, church bells rang, neighbors waved from porches, but I was learning that safety was an illusion, a pretty lie Springfield told itself. Inside our home, I was no longer just a girl. I was a target. Father's treatments became my new reality. A low grade at school, a moment of too loud laughter, a question he deemed foolish, any slip was enough. "You need to calm down, Dorothy," he'd say, his voice smooth, almost kind, as he crushed a pill into my juice or prepared a syringe. I'd taste the bitterness, feel my body betray me, my limbs growing heavy, my thoughts dissolving into a haze. I'd wake hours later, my head throbbing, my mouth dry as sand, the world slightly out of focus. Each time, I lost a little more of myself, the girl who dreamed of being a doctor, who whispered stories to her doll, who believed in a future beyond fear. Mother was barely there anymore. By 1956, her eyes were permanently glazed, her words rare and slurred. She'd sit in the parlor, her hands idle, her once nimble fingers no longer sewing or brushing my hair. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at me, a flicker of recognition in her gaze, as if she were trying to reach me through the fog. "My Dorothy," she'd murmur, her voice breaking, but Father was always nearby, his presence a warning. I wanted to grab her, to run, but where could we go? He was Dr. Gerald Fields, Springfield's saint. We were just his nervous wife and shy daughter, our stories too wild to be believed. Mrs. Sarah remained our silent witness. Her eyes, heavy with guilt, followed me as I moved through the house, quieter now, more careful. Once, when Father was out, I found her in the kitchen, chopping carrots with a rhythm that felt like escape. "Why don't you tell someone?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid the walls might hear. She stopped, her knife still, her shoulders sagging. "Child, who'd listen to me," she said, her voice low, cracked. "Your daddy's word is gold. Mine's nothing. I'd be out on the street, and you'd still be here." She looked at me then, her eyes wet. "I pray for you, Dorothy. Every night." Her words were a comfort and a wound. Prayer wasn't enough, but it was all she had. School became harder to bear. I was 11, taller now, my body changing, but my silence grew thicker. Classmates whispered about me, Dr. Fields's girl, always so serious, and teachers mistook my fear for obedience. Miss Clara had moved to another town, replaced by Mrs. Porter, who cared more for discipline than kindness. I stopped borrowing books, afraid Father would find them. My only rebellion was in my mind, where I'd rewrite the endings of stories I remembered, giving heroines the courage I lacked. But even those dreams felt fragile, like glass under Father's gaze. The town's admiration for him was a constant weight. At the grocery store, people stopped to praise his latest act of charity, delivering a baby during a blizzard, treating a poor widow for free. "Your father's an angel," Mrs. Thompson, the cashier, said, handing me a peppermint. I forced a smile, the candy bitter in my mouth. I wanted to scream, to tell her about the syringes, the locked cabinet, the way Mother's laughter had died. But fear was a leash, and Father held it tight. What if I spoke and no one believed me? What if he found out? The thought of his office, its cold instruments, kept my lips sealed. One day, a small act of defiance slipped through. At school, we were assigned to write about our heroes. Most kids wrote about soldiers or presidents, but I wrote about Mother, not the ghost she'd become, but the woman I remembered from before, the one who'd hum hymns and sew dresses with a smile. She's kind, I wrote, my pencil trembling. She loves me even when she's tired. I didn't dare show it to Father, but Mrs. Porter read it aloud in class, her voice surprised, as if she hadn't expected such feeling from me. For a moment, I felt seen, my heart swelling. But when I got home, Father was waiting. Mrs. Porter had mentioned my essay at a parent meeting, proud of my sensitivity. His smile was tight, his eyes cold. "You're drawing attention," he said, opening his bag. "We don't need that." The needle came next, and I woke in my room, the essay crumpled in the trash. That incident taught me caution, but it also sharpened my anger. I began to watch Father more closely, studying him as he studied us. I noticed how he kept his office key in his lab coat pocket, how he checked the cabinet every night, how he relaxed after his evening whiskey. I didn't know what I'd do with this knowledge, but it felt like power, a tiny shard I could hold without him knowing. I started hiding things, not just stories, but small objects, a hairpin, a pebble from the yard, a ribbon Mother had dropped. They were mine, proof I existed beyond his control. Mother's rare moments of clarity became my lifeline. One night, when Father was at a medical conference, she found me in my room, her eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. She sat on my bed, her hands cold as she took mine. "Dorothy," she whispered, her voice urgent, "you're stronger than me. Don't let him take your light." I clung to her, tears soaking my pillow, but morning came and Father returned. He dosed her before breakfast, her eyes clouding over, her words lost. I hated him then, a sharp, burning hate that scared me. But I also hated myself, for not saving her, for not being enough. By 12, I was changing, my body and mind stretching in ways I didn't understand. I felt trapped, not just by Father, but by Springfield's expectations. Girls my age were learning to cook, to curtsy, to prepare for lives as wives. I wanted more, though I barely knew what more meant. At church, I'd listen to the hymns, their promises of deliverance, and wonder if God saw us. I'd pray, not for miracles, but for courage, for a way out. One Sunday, the pastor spoke of David and Goliath, a boy who felled a giant with a single stone. The story stuck, a seed in my heart. Could I find my stone? Could I face my giant? That year, Father's control tightened. He began monitoring my schoolwork, checking my report cards with a doctor's precision. A B in math earned me a pill, a C in history a syringe. "You're disappointing me," he'd say, his disappointment worse than anger. I tried harder, not for him, but to avoid the drugs, their fog stealing my clarity. I became meticulous, memorizing formulas, reciting poems perfectly, anything to keep him at bay. But it was never enough. He'd find reasons, my posture, my tone, my attitude. Each dose chipped away at my hope, but it also fueled my resolve. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was waiting, watching, planning, though I didn't yet know for what. One afternoon, alone in the house, I found Mother's diary, hidden in an old sewing box. Its pages, yellowed and trembling, held her truth. "Gerald gave me another injection today. Says it's for my nerves, but I'm not nervous. I just want to be me." I read, my heart breaking, her words a mirror to my pain. She wrote of guilt, of failing me, of dreams she'd lost. "Dorothy deserves better," she'd scrawled, the ink smudged with tears. I closed the diary, my chest tight, and hid it under my floorboard. It was evidence, a weapon, though I didn't know how to wield it. But it was also a promise, I wasn't alone in my fight. Mother was still there, somewhere, and I'd find a way to free us both. Mother's diary changed everything. At 12, I carried its words like a talisman, hidden beneath my floorboard alongside my pebbles and stories. Each night, when the house was still, I'd read her trembling handwriting by moonlight, her pain a mirror to mine. I want to live, to breathe, to be myself, she'd written, and I felt her longing in my bones. It wasn't just proof of father's cruelty, it was a call to fight, a spark that warmed the cold fear in my chest. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was plotting, though my plan was as vague as a child's dream. Springfield, with its neat lawns and prying eyes, felt like a cage, but I was beginning to see cracks in its bars. The house remained a fortress of silence. By 1958, its brick walls seemed to absorb every sound, every hope. The roses in the front yard bloomed red as blood, their thorns a warning to anyone who got too close. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of father's antiseptics, mingling with the faint must of closed windows. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, my footsteps soft, my breath measured. Father's keys still jingled each evening, a signal to retreat, but I was learning to read him better, his silences, his glances, the way his fingers twitched when he was displeased. Knowledge was my shield, though it was a fragile one. Mother was slipping further away. Her moments of clarity were rare, stolen when father was out. Once, she found me in the backyard, where I'd escaped to watch clouds drift free across the sky. Her hand shook as she touched my hair, her eyes searching mine. "You're growing so fast," she whispered, her voice thin but warm. "Don't let him steal you." I clung to her, the grass cool beneath us, but father's car pulled into the drive, and she froze. "Go inside," she said, her face crumpling. He dosed her that night, her body slumping at the dinner table, and I stared at my plate, my fork trembling, hating my powerlessness. Father's control over me tightened. He'd begun using his drugs not just as punishment, but as routine. "For your health, Dorothy," he'd say, slipping a pill into my milk or injecting me with vitamins. I'd taste the bitter edge, feel the world blur, my thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. Each time, I'd wake in my room, my body heavy, my mind sluggish, the clock showing hours lost. I started pretending to swallow, spitting pills into my sleeve when he wasn't looking, but he was a doctor, meticulous, observant. "Don't play games," he'd warn, his eyes narrowing, and I'd feel the needles prick soon after. I was his experiment, his canvas, and he painted my silence with precision. School was no longer a refuge. At 13, I was tall, awkward, my body betraying me with changes I didn't understand. Classmates whispered about dances and crushes, their worlds light years from mine. I sat alone, my grades slipping under the weight of father's drugs. My new teacher, Mr. Hayes, was kind but distracted, his attention on the louder kids. I wanted to tell him, to show him the needle marks on my arm, but father's shadow loomed. What if he charmed Mr. Hayes, as he did everyone? What if I was sent to an institution, as father sometimes threatened? "You're becoming difficult, Dorothy," he'd say, his voice calm, deadly. "We can fix that." Mrs. Sarah was my only tether to hope. Her small acts of kindness, a warm biscuit, a gentle touch, kept me from breaking. One day, when father was at the hospital, she found me crying in my room, mother's diary clutched to my chest. "You found it," she said, her voice low, her eyes darting to the door. "Be careful, child. He'd kill us if he knew." I nodded, wiping tears, and asked, "Why does he do this?" She sighed, her face etched with years of fear. "Some men need to own everything, even souls. Your daddy's one of them." She hesitated, then added, "You're stronger than me. Find a way out." Her words were a lifeline, but they also burned. Why was it my job to escape? Why couldn't she help? Springfield's facade of perfection mocked me. At church, I'd sit beside father, his hand heavy on my shoulder, while the congregation praised his goodness. "Dr. Field saved my boy," a farmer said, shaking father's hand. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. The hymn spoke of salvation, but God felt distant, his silence as heavy as the house's. I prayed anyway, not for rescue, but for strength, for a chance to be more than a shadow. The story of David and Goliath echoed in my mind, its promise of victory faint but persistent. One evening, a rare guest came, a nurse from father's hospital, Miss Emily, young and nervous. She complimented the house, her eyes lingering on Mother's pale face. "Is Mrs. Fields unwell?" she asked, her voice soft. Father's smile was tight. "Just tired. She needs rest." I watched, heart pounding, hoping she'd press, but she nodded, sipping her tea. Later, I overheard Father on the phone, his voice low. "Emily's too curious. Transfer her." The next week, she was gone, sent to a hospital in Boston. I realized then how far his power reached, how deep his control ran. Escape seemed impossible, but the diary's weight in my hands said otherwise. I began to study Father with a new purpose. I noted his routines, the way he locked his office at night, the key in his lab coat pocket, the whiskey he drank before bed. I memorized the cabinet's contents when he left it open once, vials labeled with words I didn't understand, syringes gleaming like knives. I didn't know what I'd do with this knowledge, but it felt like a weapon, a stone for my sling. I started hiding more: Mother's hairpin, a spoon, a scrap of paper where I wrote, "I will be free." Each act was defiance, small but mine. One night, Father caught me lingering near his office. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp. I stammered, "Just looking for a book." His eyes narrowed, but he let it go, dosing me later for nerves. As the drug pulled me under, I clung to Mother's words, "Don't let him steal you." I woke, my resolve sharper, my anger a fire that warmed me. I was 13, and I knew now that waiting wasn't enough. I had to act, though the how and when were still shadows in my mind. The turning point came unexpectedly. Father announced he'd been invited to teach at a medical school in Boston, 3 days a week. He'd be gone from Monday to Wednesday, returning Thursday nights. The news was a crack in the prison walls. When he was away, the house breathed. Mrs. Sarah hummed softly, Mother's eyes cleared slightly, and I could read without fear of his footsteps. I began to dream again, not just of escape, but of a life beyond, New York, maybe, where Mother's cousin lived, a woman I'd never met but whose name felt like hope. In those brief days of freedom, I grew bolder. I'd slip into Father's office, touching his desk, testing the cabinet's lock. I found a small key once, hidden in a drawer, but didn't dare take it. I read Mother's diary again, her words fueling my courage, "Dorothy deserves better." I started talking to Mother when Father was gone, whispering plans I barely believed. "We'll leave," I'd say, holding her hand. "We'll be free." She'd nod, her eyes distant, but sometimes she'd squeeze my hand, a signal she was still there. By 14, I was no longer the girl who hid under tables. Fear still gripped me, but anger was stronger, a current pulling me toward action. I didn't know how we'd escape, but I knew we would. The diary, the key, the moments without Father, they were pieces of a puzzle I was learning to solve. Springfield's perfect facade couldn't hold us forever. Somewhere, beyond the roses and the locked cabinet, was a world where I could breathe, where Mother could laugh, where we could live. I just had to find the door. At 14, I stood on the edge of something reckless, a precipice carved by years of fear and fueled by Mother's diary. Its pages, now worn from my secret readings, were a map of our suffering, each word a step toward freedom. Springfield's winter of 1960 wrapped our house in a gray shroud, the snow piling high against the brick walls, muffling the world outside. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of Father's antiseptics and the ghosts of our silence. But Father's new teaching job in Boston, 3 days a week, had cracked the prison's foundation. Those days without him were breaths of air in a suffocating room, and I was learning to use them. The house felt different when he was gone. The roses outside, dormant under snow, no longer seemed like jailers. Mrs. Sarah's soft humming filled the kitchen, and Mother, though still frail, moved with a hint of her old grace. Her eyes, less clouded, would find mine, and sometimes she'd smile, a small, trembling thing that lit a fire in me. "We'll be all right, Dorothy," she'd whisper, her voice fragile but real. I'd hold her hand, my heart racing with plans I barely dared to name. Escape was no longer a dream, it was a necessity, as vital as air. Father's absences gave me space to think, to observe, to gather my courage. I studied his routines with a scientist's precision, noting every detail: the lab coat he hung behind the bedroom door, the silver key in its pocket, the locked cabinet in his office where he kept his vials. I'd seen enough to know what they held: pentothal, sedatives, drugs with names I couldn't pronounce but whose effects I knew too well. My body still carried their weight, the sluggish haze of forced sleep, the needle marks I hid under long sleeves. But knowledge was power, and I was collecting it, piece by piece. School was a battleground now. At 14, I was in 8th grade, my grades erratic from father's drugs and my own distraction. My teacher, Miss Lawson, was sharp, her eyes catching my flinches, my silences. "Dorothy, you're brighter than this," she said one day, holding my math test, AC circled in red. "What's holding you back?" I wanted to tell her, to spill the truth about the syringes, the diary, the prison I called home. But father's influence loomed, his charm, his reputation, his threats. "Just tired, ma'am," I mumbled, my eyes on the floor. She frowned but let it go, and I cursed my cowardice. Mrs. Sarah was my anchor, though her help remained cautious. One Monday, when father was in Boston, she caught me lingering near his office. "What you looking for, child?" she asked, her voice low, wary. I hesitated, then told her about the diary, the key, my half-formed plan. Her face tightened, her eyes darting to the door. "You're playing with fire," she said, but her tone softened. "If you're gonna do something, be smart. He's always watching." She pressed a warm biscuit into my hand, a small act of defiance, and I nodded, my resolve hardening. The town's blindness to our pain was a constant wound. Springfield buzzed with winter life, ice skating in the park, Christmas lights twinkling in the square, but no one saw us. At church, father's hand rested on my shoulder, his smile perfect as he accepted praise. "Dr. Fields, you're a godsend," the pastor said, while I stood frozen, the hymn book trembling in my hands. I prayed harder now, not just for strength, but for a sign, a way out. The story of David and Goliath haunted me, its promise of victory a flicker in the dark. I needed a stone, a sling, a moment to strike. That moment came in the spring of 1961, when I turned 15. Father announced a dinner for an important colleague, a rare event that demanded perfection. "Margaret, you'll behave," he ordered, his eyes on Mother. "No confusion, no nonsense. This is for my career." For once, he didn't dose her, wanting her to appear the perfect wife. The irony was bitter, he needed her lucid for his charade, the same lucidity he'd stolen for years. I saw my chance, a narrow window where his guard might slip. I'd been preparing, though I hadn't admitted it to myself. I'd memorized the key's weight in my hand, the cabinet's lock, the vial's labels. I'd practiced moving silently, my footsteps light as air. Mother's diary was my guide, its words a drumbeat: "Dorothy deserves better." I'd whispered my plan to her one night when father was away, my voice trembling. "We'll leave, Mama. We'll go to New York, to your cousin." She'd nodded, her eyes bright with something like hope, though fear lingered. "Be careful, my girl," she said, squeezing my hand. "He's dangerous." The dinner was a performance, the house polished to a shine, the table set with Mother's old china. I wore a starched dress, my hair tied back, my smile practiced. The guest, Dr. Reynolds, was an older man, his laugh loud, his eyes sharp. Mother played her part, her smile fragile but convincing, her voice soft as she answered his questions. I served the meal, my hand steady, my heart pounding. Father was charming, his stories of medical triumphs filling the room, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the way he watched Mother, me, everything. After dinner, the men retired to Father's office for whiskey and cigars, a ritual that gave me my opening. Mrs. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, her back to me. I'd hidden a vial of pentothal and a syringe under my mattress, stolen weeks earlier during one of Father's absences. My hand shook as I retrieved them, the glass cold against my skin. I slipped into the kitchen, my breath shallow. "I'll take the coffee," I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside. Mrs. Sarah turned, her eyes narrowing. "What you doing, Dorothy?" she asked, suspicion in her voice. "Helping," I said, meeting her gaze. She hesitated, then nodded, turning back to the stove. I poured the coffee, my hands trembling as I injected the pentothal into Father's cup, the one with the medical school emblem he always used. I'd guessed the dose, praying it was enough to knock him out but not kill him. The tray felt heavy as I carried it to the office, my heart a drum in my chest. "Coffee, gentlemen," I said, serving Dr. Reynolds first, then Father, avoiding his eyes. "You may go," he said, dismissing me without a glance. I retreated to the kitchen, peering through the door's crack, my breath held. Minutes passed, agonizingly slow. They talked, laughed, sipped their coffee. I began to doubt, had I used the wrong vial? The wrong dose? Then Father's voice faltered, his words slurring. He blinked, his hand loosening around his glass. "Gerald, are you all right?" Dr. Reynolds asked, leaning forward. Father mumbled something, his head lolling, and then he collapsed, his body slumping in the armchair. Dr. Reynolds shouted for Mrs. Sarah, who rushed in, her face a mask of shock. "He's exhausted," she said, her voice unsteady, following my lead. I stood frozen, guilt and relief warring inside me. While Dr. Reynolds called for help, I ran to Mother's room. She sat on the bed, her eyes wide with fear. "Dorothy, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. I took her hands, my words tumbling out. "I did it, Mama. I used his drugs. He's out, but we have to move now." Her face paled, but she nodded, a spark of her old strength flaring. "What did you do?" she whispered, but there was no time to explain. "We're leaving," I said, pulling her to her feet. "Tonight." We moved quickly, driven by desperation. I grabbed the diary, her few belongings, my hidden treasures, pebbles, ribbons, the spoon. Mrs. Sarah met us in the hall, her eyes wet. "Go," she whispered, pressing a small wad of bills into my hand, her savings. "Don't look back." I hugged her, tears burning, knowing I'd never see her again. Mother and I slipped out the back door, the night cold and sharp, the stars bright above Springfield's sleeping streets. We had no plan, only a name, Mother's cousin in New York, and a fire in our hearts. The prison was behind us, but the world ahead was unknown, and I was terrified, exhilarated, free. The night we fled Springfield, the world felt vast and merciless, a canvas of stars above and cold earth below. Mother and I moved through the shadows, our breath visible in the March chill, our footsteps muffled by snow-dusted grass. My heart pounded, each beat a mix of terror and triumph. I'd drugged Father, turned his own weapon against him, but the weight of what I'd done clung to me like damp wool. What if he woke too soon? What if Dr. Reynolds suspected? The diary, tucked inside my coat, was our only proof, its pages heavy with truth no one might believe. Mother's hand trembled in mine, her steps unsteady, but her eyes held a flicker of the woman she'd been before Father's drugs stole her light. Springfield slept as we hurried toward the edge of town, its neat houses and glowing street lamps a mockery of the prison we'd escaped. The air smelled of wood smoke and frost, the silence broken only by the distant bark of a dog. We aimed for Bishop Thomas's residence, the only person in town with enough moral weight to challenge Father. I'd overheard Mother mention him once, years ago, her voice wistful. "He listens, Dorothy. He sees." It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all we had. Mrs. Sarah's money, 10 crumpled dollars, burned in my pocket, a lifeline we couldn't waste. The Episcopal residence loomed at the end of a quiet street, its stone facade softened by ivy, its windows dark. Mother's breathing was ragged, her body weak from years of sedation, but she kept pace, driven by the same fire that burned in me. The night guard, a burly man with a skeptical frown, blocked the gate. "What business do you have at this hour?" he demanded, eyeing Mother's pale face, my disheveled dress. "We need Bishop Thomas," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's an emergency." He hesitated, his gaze softening at our desperation, and finally led us inside. Bishop Thomas was older than I'd imagined, his white hair glowing in the lamplight, his eyes kind but piercing. We sat in his study, the air warm with the scent of old books and wax. I told our story, my words tumbling out, the drugs, the diary, father's control, the dinner, the pentothal. Mother nodded, her voice faint but firm as she added details, her hands clutching mine. I showed him the diary, its pages trembling in my hands. He read in silence, his face tightening, his fingers tracing Mother's words. "This is grave," he said finally, his voice heavy. "But you're safe here tonight. I promise you that." He arranged for us to stay with Mrs. Clara, a widow trusted by the church, her small house a haven of warmth and simplicity. For the first time in years, I slept without fear, though nightmares of Father's cold eyes haunted me. Mother curled beside me, her breathing uneven, her body still craving the drugs she'd been fed. Morning brought clarity and dread. We were free, but Father's reach was long, his reputation a shield. Bishop Thomas convened a council, the sheriff, a judge, an out-of-town doctor, while we hid our fate in their hands. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and waiting. Mrs. Clara fed us soup, her eyes soft with pity, her silence a comfort. Mother's withdrawal was brutal, tremors, sweats, moments of confusion where she'd call for Father, then weep when she remembered. I held her, singing the hymns she'd once loved, my voice cracking. "We're free, Mama," I'd whisper, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The council deliberated, examining the diary, Mother's needle marks, my testimony. Mrs. Sarah, summoned in secret, confirmed our story, her voice shaking with years of suppressed guilt. "I saw it all," she said, tears falling. "I should have done more." Father's response was predictable. He denied everything, his voice smooth, convincing. "My wife is unwell, unstable," he told the council. "Dorothy's been influenced by her delusions. They need care, not accusations." He suggested institutionalizing me, his concern a perfect mask. My stomach churned at the thought, but the evidence, his own meticulous notes, found in the cabinet we'd described, was damning. The diaries, his and Mother's, painted a chilling picture, a doctor who treated his family as test subjects, documenting doses and effects with scientific detachment. The council faced a dilemma. In 1961 Springfield, a public scandal involving a respected doctor was unthinkable. They offered Father a deal, relinquish his rights over us, never contact us again, and the case would be handled as a quiet divorce, no charges pressed. To my shock, he agreed, perhaps sensing the tide turning, perhaps fearing other victims might surface. I'd never know why, but his surrender felt like a victory, hollow but real. On a crisp September morning, Mother and I stood at the train station, two small suitcases at our feet, tickets to New York in my hand. Bishop Thomas had arranged for Mother's cousin, Eleanor, to meet us, a lifeline we clung to. As the train pulled away, Springfield steeples and rooftops fading, Mother smiled, a real smile, bright as the sun breaking through clouds. "We're going to live now, Dorothy," she said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, tears burning, the diary safe in my bag. The world ahead was unknown, but for the first time, it felt possible. New York loomed, a city of noise and promise, where we'd rebuild from ashes. Grand Central Station was a chaos of motion, voices echoing off marble, the air thick with cigarette smoke and possibility. We stepped off the train, our suitcases battered, our clothes wrinkled, two small-town women dwarfed by the city's pulse. Eleanor waited on the platform, a sturdy woman in her 50s, her eyes warm as she hugged us without questions. "Come on, bus is leaving," she said, grabbing a suitcase. Her apartment on 7th Avenue was cramped, the three of us sharing a single bed, but it was ours, free of locks and fear. Mother's recovery was slow, her body fighting the absence of Father's drugs. She'd wake screaming, her hands clawing the air, and I'd hold her, whispering, "He's gone, Mama. We're safe." Eleanor treated it with calm, brewing strong tea, telling stories of her own hard years as a seamstress. "You're tougher than you look, Margaret," she'd say, and Mother would nod, her eyes clearing day by day. I enrolled at St. Agnes School, a nuns' institution, thanks to Bishop Thomas's letter. The scholarship was partial, but I was determined to learn, to reclaim the education Father had tried to deny me. Eleanor found mother work at her garment district workshop, where her skill with a needle shone. She'd sew late into the night, her fingers steadying, her pride growing with each finished piece. I helped at a nearby grocery, stacking shelves for Mr. Antonio, a kind Italian who slipped us bruised apples and day-old bread. "No waste," he'd say, winking, and I'd smile, grateful for his quiet charity. Our life was spare, shared bathrooms, thin walls, meals of rice and beans, but it was ours, built on truth, not lies. At 15, I was no longer the girl who hid under tables. School challenged me, the nuns strict but fair, their rules a relief after father's whims. I studied fiercely, driven by mother's words, "Don't let him steal you." I made no friends, my scars too fresh, but I found solace in books, in the rhythm of learning. At night, I'd write in a new journal, not of pain, but of hope, plans for a future where I'd teach, help others, be free. Mother read them once, her eyes wet. "You're my miracle," she said, and I believed her. New York was loud, alive, a contrast to Springfield's stifled quiet. The city's pulse, honking cabs, street vendors' calls, the rumble of the subway, felt like freedom. But the past lingered. I'd wake from dreams of father's office, his syringe glinting, and check the doors locked twice. Mother's recovery faltered at times, her hands trembling over her needle, but she pushed on, her strength a beacon. We were rebuilding, stitch by stitch, and though the road was long, we walked it together, our eyes on the horizon. New York's pulse beat through our new life, a rhythm of possibility that drowned out the echoes of Springfield's silence. By 1962, I was 16, my world expanding in the cramped but vibrant space of our Queens room, rented with mother's seamstress wages and my grocery store earnings. The city was a tapestry of noise and color, siren wails, street musicians' jazz, the sharp tang of hot dog carts mingling with exhaust. Our room, with its peeling wallpaper and single window overlooking a bustling street, was no palace, but it was freedom, its key ours alone. Mother's hands, once trembling from father's drugs, now danced with needle and thread, stitching hope into every seam. I, too, was stitching, a life, a future, a self I was only beginning to understand. Mother's recovery was a slow bloom, fragile but persistent. The withdrawal left scars, nightmares that woke her gasping, moments where her eyes clouded with old fears, but she fought. At the garment workshop, her skill earned respect, her nimble fingers mending delicate fabrics for Manhattan's elite. "You've got a gift," Margaret, her boss, Mr. Levine, would say, and she'd blush, her smile brighter each day. At home, she'd hum hymns again, her voice soft but steady, filling our room with warmth. I'd watch her, marveling at her resilience, though I saw the effort it took, the way her hands clenched when memories surfaced. School at St. Agnes was my anchor. The nuns, with their starched habits and sharp eyes, demanded excellence, but their rules were predictable, a relief after father's whims. I threw myself into study, my grades climbing, driven by a hunger to prove I was more than father's shadow. History and literature were my refuge, stories of revolutions, of women like Sojourner Truth who spoke truth to power. I'd scribble notes in my journal, not just lessons, but dreams, to teach, to help, to ensure no child felt as voiceless as I had. The nuns noticed. "You've a sharp mind, Dorothy," Sister Mary said, her tone approving. "Don't waste it." I wouldn't. I couldn't. Our life was lean, rice and beans, second-hand clothes, a shared bathroom down the hall, but small joys sustained us. Mr. Antonio at the grocery store slipped me overripe peaches, his grin wide. "For my best worker," he'd say, and I'd carry them home, their juice sweet on mother's lips. Eleanor, now a surrogate aunt, visited Sundays, her laughter filling our room as she shared stories of the garment district's quirks. "You're doing fine, girls," she'd say, squeezing mother's hand. Her faith in us was a lifeline, a reminder we weren't alone. But the past was a stubborn ghost. Nightmares woke me, father's syringe glinting in my dreams, his voice whispering, "You're mine." I'd check the door's lock, my heart racing, the diary under my pillow a reminder of what we'd escaped. Mother had her own ghosts. One night, I found her staring at the wall, her needle idle. What if he finds us? She whispered, her voice small. I took her hands, my own trembling. He won't, Mama. We're free. She nodded, but fear lingered, a shadow we couldn't outrun. I hated Father then, not just for what he'd done, but for the fear he'd planted, a weed that choked our new roots. At school, I was still an outsider, my scars too raw for friendships. Classmates chattered about boys and dances, their lives light, while I carried a weight they couldn't see. But one teacher, Mr. Carter, a young history instructor, saw through my silence. You've got something to say, Dorothy, he said after I wrote an essay on the Underground Railroad. Don't hold back. His words sparked something, a desire to speak, to be seen. I started raising my hand, my voice tentative but growing, each word a rebellion against Father's control. Mother's strength inspired me. By 1963, she'd earned a better job at a downtown clothing store, her skill with alterations catching the owner's eye. The extra money let us rent a slightly larger apartment, still modest but with our own bathroom, a luxury that felt like wealth. She'd come home tired but proud, her hand steady as she showed me a dress she'd mended. This is mine, she'd say, her eyes bright. No one can take it. I'd nod, my heart swelling, seeing the woman she was becoming, the one Father had tried to erase. I took on more hours at the grocery, my arms strong from lifting crates, my smile genuine for customers who called me sweetheart. Mr. Antonio taught me to count change fast, his patience a balm. You're a good kid, Dorothy, he'd say, and I'd believe him, if only for a moment. The work was hard, but it was mine, each dime saved a step toward independence. I'd walk home through Queens, the city's lights a constellation of possibility, dreaming of college, of teaching, of a life where fear didn't lurk. One evening, Mother sat me down, her face serious. I met someone, she said, her voice soft. My stomach tightened, fear flaring. His name's Oscar. He's an accountant, a widower. He's kind, Dorothy, but I'm scared. I saw her vulnerability, the scars Father left, and my own fear mirrored hers. What if he's like, I couldn't finish. She took my hand, her grip firm. He's not. But I need you to meet him, to tell me what you think. I nodded, my heart heavy, knowing we couldn't let Father's shadow dictate our lives. Oscar came to dinner, a quiet man with gentle eyes and a nervous smile. He brought daisies, their simplicity disarming, and spoke softly, asking about my school, listening when I answered. Mother watched him, her face soft, hopeful. I watched, too, searching for signs of control, of danger, but found none. He's different, I told her later, my voice cautious. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I want to try, Dorothy. To be happy. I hugged her, my fear easing, replaced by a fragile hope. By 1964, our life was taking shape. Mother and Oscar's courtship was slow, respectful, a dance of two people scarred but brave. I graduated 8th grade with honors, my teachers praise a spark that warmed me. I started high school, my dreams of teaching clearer, fueled by Mr. Carter's encouragement. The city's energy, its crowded subways, its neon signs, its endless voices, felt like a promise. We were rebuilding, not just surviving, but thriving, stitch by stitch, day by day. But the past wasn't done with us. One night, I found Mother's old diary, its pages yellowed, and read again her dream of freedom, Dorothy and I on a beach, the sun shining, free. Tears fell as I realized we were living that dream, not on a beach, but in this noisy, messy city, free to be ourselves. I added my own page, writing, "We're here, Mama. We're alive." The diary was no longer just evidence, it was a testament, a bridge from pain to purpose. At 16, I stood taller, my voice stronger, my heart open to possibility. Mother's laughter, once a memory, was real again, filling our apartment. Oscar's quiet presence was a comfort, his respect for her a healing balm. School was my battleground, each AA victory, each essay a declaration of who I was becoming. New York was our home, its chaos our sanctuary. The scars remained, but they were part of us, not our masters. We were free, And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew we'd walk it together, our steps sure, our eyes on the light. By 1965, New York had woven itself into the fabric of our lives, its relentless energy both a challenge and a gift. At 17, I was a high school junior, my world a whirlwind of textbooks, grocery store shifts, and dreams that grew sharper with each passing day. Our Queens apartment, small but ours, hummed with life, Mother's sewing machine whirring late into the night, the radio playing jazz, the smell of Eleanor's Sunday pot roast lingering in the air. The city's pulse, screeching tires, vendors' shouts, the subway's rumble, felt like a heartbeat, urging us forward. Mother's laughter, once a faint memory, now filled our home, her strength a beacon. Yet the past lingered, a shadow we couldn't fully outrun, its weight testing our fragile new roots. Mother's relationship with Oscar blossomed, a slow, steady unfolding that eased my fears. He was a man of quiet gestures, a book for me, a shawl for Mother, a patience that never pushed. Their courtship, cautious and respectful, was a stark contrast to Father's control. One evening, as we shared spaghetti in our cramped kitchen, Oscar spoke of his late wife, his voice soft. "She taught me to listen, Dorothy. I try to honor that with your mother." I saw Mother's eyes soften, her hand resting on his, and felt a knot in my chest loosen. "He's good for her," I told Eleanor later, and she nodded, her smile warm. "He's good for both of you." Mother's work at the clothing store flourished. Her alterations were in demand, her skill turning faded dresses into treasures. She'd come home with stories of wealthy clients, her voice alive with pride. "They trust me, Dorothy," she'd say, her hand steady as she mended a hem. Her recovery wasn't linear, some nights, she'd wake trembling, Father's ghost in her dreams, but she fought, her hymns a shield against the dark. I'd sing with her, our voices blending, a reminder of who we were becoming. Her strength fueled mine, her courage a mirror for my own. School was my proving ground. St. Agnes's nuns pushed me hard, their expectations a fire that burned away doubt. I excelled in English and history, my essays earning praise from Mr. Carter, who'd moved to the high school. "You write with truth, Dorothy," he said, handing back a paper on the civil rights movement. "That's rare." His words lit something in me, a desire to use my voice, to tell stories that mattered. I joined the school newspaper, my articles small but bold, each byline a defiance of Father's attempts to silence me. I dreamed of college, of teaching, of helping kids like the girl I'd been. Money was tight, our budget a delicate balance. My grocery store job helped, Mr. Antonio's kindness, extra shifts, dented cans, a lifeline. I'd walk home through Queens, the city's neon lights reflecting off wet pavement, my mind racing with plans. Mother saved every penny, her eyes on a future where we'd need no one's charity. "Education's your freedom, Dorothy," she'd say, echoing Mr. Carter. "No one can take that." I nodded, my resolve iron, knowing college meant loans, sacrifices, but also a door to a life I could shape. The past struck without warning. One night, I found a letter slipped under our door, no return address, the handwriting unfamiliar. "Dorothy, your father knows where you are," it read, and signed. My heart stopped, the room spinning. Mother, seeing my face, took the letter, her hands shaking. "It's a lie," she said, but her voice wavered. We sat up all night, the diary open between us, its pages a reminder of Father's power. "He can't touch us," I said, more to myself than her. We changed the locks, told Eleanor, but sleep came hard, Father's shadow creeping back. Oscar was our rock. When we showed him the letter, his face hardened, but his voice stayed calm. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his hand on Mother's. He hired a lawyer friend to check on Father's whereabouts, learning he'd stayed in Springfield, remarried, his life untouched by our escape. The news was a bitter pill, his freedom mocked our pain, but it also freed us. He wasn't coming. The letter, likely a cruel prank, lost its power. "We're stronger than him," Mother said, her eyes fierce, and I believed her. At school, I poured my fear into my work. My articles grew bolder, tackling local issues, poverty, discrimination, my voice finding its edge. Mr. Carter encouraged me, slipping me books by James Baldwin, Maya Angelou. "They survived, Dorothy," he said. "So will you." I read voraciously, their words a map for my own survival. I started tutoring younger students, kids with hungry eyes and heavy burdens, seeing myself in them. "You're good at this," one girl, Maria, said, her smile shy. I felt a purpose take root, a calling to lift others as I was lifting myself. Mother and Oscar's bond deepened. In 1966, they married in a simple courthouse ceremony, Mother radiant in a light blue dress we'd sewn together. I was her maid of honor, my heart full as I watched her vow to a man who saw her, not as a possession, but as a partner. The lunch that followed, at a modest diner, was filled with laughter, Eleanor's jokes, Mr. Antonio's toasts, the clink of glasses. "To new beginnings," Oscar said, his eyes on Mother, and I raised my glass, tears prickling. Father's shadow faded in that moment, outshone by love. I graduated high school that year, my grades earning a partial scholarship to Hunter College. I chose education, not medicine. Father had tainted that dream, but teaching felt right, a way to give voice to the silenced. Mother and Oscar moved to a small house in Sunnyside, their life a quiet joy. I stayed in our apartment, my teacher's salary stretching to cover rent, my days a blur of classes and tutoring. The city's chaos, its crowded streets, its endless stories, fed my hunger to grow, to heal. But healing wasn't linear. Nightmares still came, Father's voice whispering, "You'll never escape." I'd wake, clutching my journal, writing until the fear ebbed. One night, I reread Mother's diary, its final page a dream of freedom on a beach. I added my own, "We're free, Mama. We're building something new." The words were a vow, a bridge from pain to purpose. At church, I found solace, the hymns a reminder of God's presence, not absence. "You're a survivor, Dorothy," the pastor said, his eyes kind. "That's your testimony." At 18, I stood at a crossroads, my scars a map of where I'd been, my dreams a guide to where I'd go. Mother's laughter, Oscar's steady presence, my students' eager faces, they were my anchors. New York was my canvas, its possibilities endless. The past still whispered, but I was learning to answer with my own voice, loud and clear. I was Dorothy Fields, not Father's shadow, but a woman forging her path, one step, one word, one act of courage at a time. New York's heartbeat pulsed through my veins by 1967, its rhythm a call to keep moving, to keep becoming. At 19, I was a college freshman at Hunter, my days a blur of lectures, tutoring, and late-night study sessions in our Queens apartment, now mine alone. The city's vibrancy, neon signs flickering, street preachers shouting, the clatter of subway cars, felt like a promise of possibility. Mother and Oscar's Sunnyside home was a haven, their quiet love a steady light. Our scars remained, but we were weaving them into strength, building lives Father couldn't touch. Yet the past was a stubborn echo, its whispers testing my resolve, urging me to transform pain into purpose. College was a revelation. Hunter's halls buzzed with ideas, protests against the Vietnam War, debates on civil rights, voices demanding change. I soaked it in, my education classes sparking a fire. I wanted to teach, to empower kids who felt invisible, as I once had. My professor, Dr. Ellis, saw my drive. "You've got a gift, Dorothy," she said, grading my essay on inclusive education. "You teach from the heart." Her words echoed Mr. Carter's, fueling my dream. I worked harder, my scholarship demanding excellence, my nights lit by lamplight and ambition. Money was a constant struggle. My tutoring and part-time library job barely covered rent and tuition. Mother helped when she could, her sewing business growing, but I hated leaning on her. Oscar slipped me grocery money once, his smile gentle. "Family takes care of family," he said, and I nodded, swallowing pride. The city's grit, its crowded tenements, its hungry-eyed kids, mirrored my own hustle. I'd walk home through Queens, the air sharp with diesel and possibility, dreaming of a classroom where no child felt silenced. Mother's transformation was a quiet miracle. Her atelier, a small Sunnyside shop, hummed with activity, her dresses sought after by local brides. She'd work late, her hands steady, her hymns filling the air. "This is mine, Dorothy," she'd say, pinning fabric, her eyes bright. Oscar supported her, his accounting skills keeping the books balanced. Their marriage, built on respect, was a balm to our wounds. One Sunday, as we shared coffee at their kitchen table, Mother touched my hand. "You're my strength," she said, her voice soft. I shook my head. "No, Mama. You're mine." We laughed, tears falling, our bond a fortress. The past struck in quiet moments. Nightmares of Father's office, its antiseptic smell, his cold eyes, woke me, my heart racing. I'd clutch my journal, writing until the fear faded, words my shield. One night, I found Mother's diary, its pages brittle, and read her dream of freedom. I added my own, "We're living it, Mama. We're enough." Church grounded me, its hymns a reminder of grace. "God carried you, Dorothy," the pastor said, and I believed him, my faith a thread weaving pain into purpose. At Hunter, I found my voice. I joined a student group advocating for better schools, my articles in the college paper tackling urban education's gaps. "You write like you've lived it," a classmate, Charles, said, his eyes warm. A history major with a quiet intensity, he shared my passion for change. We'd talk for hours, debating policy, sharing books, Baldwin, Frary. His friendship, slow and steady, cracked my walls. "You're not alone, Dorothy," he said one evening, his hand brushing mine. I flinched, Father's shadow lingering, but Charles's patience was a gift, his presence safe. In 1968, Charles and I married, a simple ceremony filled with love. Mother, radiant in a dress she'd sewn, walked me down the aisle. Oscar teared up, Eleanor joked, and Mr. Antonio toasted with cheap wine. Our honeymoon in Atlantic City was brief but perfect, the ocean's vastness a mirror to our future. "The world's big and small, isn't it?" Charles said, sand between our toes. I nodded, my heart full, knowing we'd build something new, free of Father's chains. Our Brooklyn apartment was tiny, its walls thin, but it was ours. Charles taught high school history, his idealism infectious. I graduated college, my degree a hard-won badge, and took a teaching job at a crowded elementary school. My students, kids with heavy burdens, hungry bellies, broken homes, were my purpose. "You see us, Miss Fields," a boy, Jamal, said, his smile shy. I did, and it broke my heart, drove my mission. I started a reading club, sneaking in lessons on resilience, hoping to light sparks in their eyes. Mother's atelier grew, her joy a quiet triumph. She and Oscar hosted dinners, their home a refuge. But the past wasn't silent. In 1970, I got a letter from Mrs. Sarah, our old housekeeper. Father had died, a stroke in his office, alone. The news was a strange void, no grief, no relief, just emptiness. "Do you want to go?" Charles asked, his hand on mine. I shook my head. "He's gone. That's enough." That night, I read Mother's diary, its final dream of freedom, a truth we'd lived. I wrote, "He's no longer our jailer. We are free." That year, Cecilia was born, our daughter, named for the poet whose verses had sustained me. Holding her, I felt terror and wonder, terror that I'd fail her, wonder at her perfection. "She'll never know fear like we did," I vowed, Charles's arms around us. He was a father never was, gentle, present, his love a shield. Cecilia's laughter filled our home, her curiosity a light. "Why's the sky blue, Mama?" she'd ask, and I'd answer, marveling at her freedom to question, to be. My teaching took on new urgency. I saw myself in my students, their silences, their flinches. I trained to spot abuse, my past a lens. One girl, Lily, reminded me of me, quiet, watchful, needle marks under her sleeves. I worked with counselors, got her help, saw her smile return. "You saved me, Miss Fields," she said, and I cried, knowing I'd saved a piece of myself, too. At 24, I was no longer just a survivor. I was a teacher, a mother, a wife, a woman with a voice. New York's chaos was my home, its struggles my fight. Mother's laughter, Cecilia's giggles, Charles's steady love, they were my anchors. The scars remained, but they were maps, guiding me to purpose. I was building a life, not just for me, but for every child who needed a hand, a voice, a chance. The past whispered, but I answered with action, my heart set on the future. By 1975, New York's grit and glow had shaped me into a woman I barely recognized, a teacher, a mother, a voice for those who couldn't speak. At 29, I stood in my Brooklyn classroom, chalk dust on my fingers, my students' eager faces a mirror of the purpose I'd fought to claim. Our apartment, small but warm, echoed with Cecilia's laughter, Charles's soft guitar strums, and the hum of a life built on love, not fear. Mother's Sunnyside atelier thrived, her dresses adorning brides across Queens, her joy a testament to our escape. The city's pulse, its honking cabs, its neon-lit nights, its restless energy, drove me forward, but the past remained a quiet echo, its lessons etched in my bones, urging me to turn pain into power. Teaching was my calling, a daily act of defiance against father's silencing. My fourth graders, a mix of dreamers and survivors, came from Brooklyn's toughest corners, tenements, foster homes, lives heavier than their years. I saw myself in their flinches, their guarded eyes, and poured my heart into reaching them. You're enough, I'd tell them, words I'd needed at their age. I created a safe space, books they loved, a corner for stories, lessons on courage disguised as math or spelling. One boy, Marcus, his arms scarred like mine, wrote a poem about flying free. You get me, Miss Fields, he said, his smile rare but real. I did, and it fueled my mission. Charles was my anchor, his love a steady current. He'd risen to assistant principal at his school, his passion for history inspiring kids to see themselves in the past. At night, we'd talk over coffee, planning lessons, dreaming of a better world for Cecilia. You're changing lives, Dorothy, he'd say, his eyes warm. I'd blush, still shy with praise, but I felt it, each student I helped was a victory over father's shadow. Cecilia, now 5, was our light, her questions endless, her curls bouncing as she danced to Motown records. Mama, can I be a teacher like you? She asked, her eyes bright. You can be anything, I said, my heart full, knowing she'd grow up free. Mother's life was a quiet triumph. Her atelier, now a local institution, drew clients from Manhattan to Long Island. She'd expanded, hiring 2 seamstresses, her hands still nimble despite old tremors. Oscar managed the books, his pride in her boundless. They'd host us for Sunday dinners, their Sunnyside home filled with warmth, roast chicken, Eleanor's stories, Cecilia's giggles. We made it, Dorothy, Mother said one evening, her hand on mine, her eyes clear of father's haze. I nodded, tears prickling, seeing the woman she'd reclaimed, the mother who'd carried me through hell. The past wasn't silent, though. Nightmares came less often, but when they did, father's voice hissed, "You're nothing." I'd wake, Charles's arms around me, and write in my journal, turning fear into fuel. Mother's diary, now in a locked box, was a sacred relic, its pages a map of our survival. I'd read it sometimes, her dream of a free life, sun, sand, us laughing, now a truth we lived. Church anchored me, its hymns a reminder of grace. You're a warrior, Dorothy, the pastor said, his smile kind. I was beginning to believe it. My work took on new depth. I trained in trauma-informed teaching, my past a lens for spotting abuse. I worked with social workers, helping kids like Lily, whose needle marks had haunted me. One girl, Tanya, arrived mid-year, her eyes hollow, her arms bruised. I stayed late, earning her trust, connecting her to counselors. You didn't give up on me, she said, months later, her smile shy. I hugged her, tears falling, knowing each child I saved healed a piece of me. I spoke at teacher conferences, my voice steady, sharing strategies for reaching wounded kids. They need to be seen, I'd say, my story woven into every word. In 1976, I was promoted to lead teacher, a role that let me shape curriculum, mentor others. Charles cheered, Cecilia drew me a card with a smiling sun. You're the boss, Mama, she said, and I laughed, my heart light. The extra pay eased our budget, letting us save for Cecilia's future, maybe a house someday. Mother and Oscar celebrated with us, their pride a warmth I carried. "You're doing what I couldn't," Mother said, her voice soft. "I just followed you," I replied, our hands clasped, our bond unbreakable. The past struck one last time. In 1977, a package arrived, no sender, postmarked Springfield. Inside was a photo of Father's old house, the roses stark against its brick, and a note, "You can't erase me." My hand shook, the room tilting. Charles held me, his voice calm. "It's nothing, Dorothy. He's gone." We burned the note, the photo, the smoke curling like a prayer. Mother, when I told her, went pale but stood tall. "He's dust," she said, her voice fierce. "We're alive." I nodded, the fear ebbing, replaced by a truth. Father's shadow was small against our light. Cecilia grew, her spirit fierce, her questions sharp. "Why do some kids hurt, Mama?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I told her stories of resilience, not pain, planting seeds of compassion. She'd draw for my students, her crayons bright, her heart open. Charles and I dreamed of another child, our love a foundation strong enough for more. My classroom expanded, my reading club a haven, my voice in meetings bold. I wrote a guide for teachers, seeing the unseen, my story veiled but present, its pages a bridge from my past to others' futures. At 31, I stood tall, my scars a tapestry of survival, my life a testament to redemption. New York's chaos was my home, its struggles my fight. Mother's atelier, Charles's school, Cecilia's laughter, they were my roots. I spoke at a city education conference, my words clear, every child deserves a voice. The applause was loud, but the real victory was in my students' eyes, in Mother's proud smile, in the life we'd built. The past whispered, but I answered with action, my heart aflame, my purpose a beacon for those still in shadows.